Hi everyone, welcome. I'm preparing to check in on the newest of my worm bins. So all the oldest stuff is over here to the left, and then as you make your way to the right, you eventually get to the lower right corner of this shelf, which is where the now 34-day-old bin of red wigglers lives. It's a system that's now been fed 3 times. Last feeding was 11 days ago. And I believe the interval between feedings was 11 days prior. So we're going to get these little guys up on the bench and see how they're coming along. So let's get to work. So in that brief intro, I covered most of the info on this board with the exception of one bit, which is the estimated worm count. The number of worms thought to live in this system is 2,784 worms, and that's an initial estimate that we arrived at together jointly, because I always take everyone's estimate. There were 12 estimates for the initial launch of this system, and that includes my own, all 12 numbers averaged together to come up with an initial amount. And then that last check-in 11 days ago, we added a few hundred worms. I mean, some people estimated a couple hundred, some people estimated less, so I think there we had 8 people that kicked in their guesses. So, with a fair number of people kicking in their numbers, and still the potential for a few more people to kick in their estimates for how many additional worms got thrown in during that last check-in 11 days ago, there's still a likelihood that the number might shift a little bit, but probably not by much at this point. So I do believe what we're dealing with here is a system in which we've got somewhere between 2,700 and 2,800 worms living. So now I've got for them a nice assortment of different frozen veggies and fruits from the freezer. I'm not quite sure what I'm seeing here, but it does look to me like some potato peel, I think a couple chunks of plum. This to me looks like part of a strawberry, but perhaps once we break this chunk of frozen yummy stuff apart, we'll be able to better see what we've got for them. And we've also got a replacement coffee filter, so the old one right here can be used as bedding down in the feeding zone, and then a day's worth of coffee. So let's get down to giving them their feeding. So that last feeding, I didn't even look over the video from last time. I don't even remember what was fed. So after 11 days, I guess depending on what we fed, we may or may not see some leftovers. So let's explore the middle and see what we see. I can already see a couple worms, but perhaps if we get deeper, we'll see more, and I could sense a lot of moisture. I haven't even dug all the way down, but the moisture level is quite high, and it's not surprising that where there's moisture, you'll find the worms. And now I'm starting to see signs of the last feeding, and even more worms beginning to appear here. So it does appear to me as if some of this stuff here is some leftover coffee from the last feeding. I believe I can even see some grit that was probably applied. And I'm sure we'll see some other food substances in here. And now we're bumping into a good many worms hanging out down here in the feeding zone. Yeah, I think that estimate of 2,900 worms, something like that. What was it, 2,784? That seems realistic based on what I'm seeing down here. We, when we bought these little guys out of their old environment, the method that we used to lure them out of their old environment was what I refer to as the horizontal migration approach. And usually when I assemble a horizontal migration feeding zone for the worms to be drawn over to, I build a little partition to help separate the feeding zone from the lovely finished castings, mainly because I just don't want to see any of the stuff I've used to construct the horizontal migration feeding zone contaminate the lovely worm castings. So the little partition wall, I believe that's what we're starting to see bits of here, these chunks of cardboard. And I believe we actually deviated from the norm, because normally I'll puncture that piece of cardboard to give the worms easy means of passing through and getting over. But in this case, I don't see any holes in the cardboard that was used for that purpose. So it is ringing a bell. I do believe that's the way we had set it up. But the worms managed to get right by the partition and make their way into the horizontal migration feeding zone. And I think the estimates for how many worms were placed in here last time out of the bait box used to lure the stragglers out of the remaining vermicompost was just another indicator to show that the migration was quite successful, because we did only manage to lure what was estimated to be a couple hundred worms out of the vermicompost after the main haul out. So it does seem like we were pretty successful in getting the majority of the worms out on the first try. But I do always like to, especially if I can sense that the vermicompost has got some stragglers remaining in it, I'm always up for attempting to round up the stragglers. And then I just have that feeling like the material I'm preparing to harvest is in fact fully depopulated. Now I didn't really prepare with my prepared bedding. Yeah, here it is. It's not too difficult for me to just go over to the shelf behind me and grab it. So why don't we give them a little extra bedding material sprinkled down into the feeding zone over here as a foundation onto which we can place today's feeding. So we've got a replacement for this feeding zone indicator. So we'll place the old one down here, and then some of these cardboard bits that we reclaimed out of the feeding zone will also be nice supplementary bedding. Well, it's not supplementary bedding at this point. It's been deemed as bedding already, so it's just going back in as what it already had been. So the foods they're getting are this nice big pile of coffee, which we'll sprinkle in after we've spread out this assortment of different stuff. So let's see if I'm able to bust it apart. It's pretty much frozen solid into a block, but since there's so much varied stuff in here, it does normally break apart pretty readily, especially since just a mix of this, that, and the other thing. Perhaps if it was all the same sort of stuff, it would freeze together into more of a solid mass, but since it's a little bit of this and a little bit of that, variety of different textures and moisture contents, it does usually break apart pretty readily. So that to me seems like a pretty nice, generous portion. And you know, before I return all this paper product right back down into the feeding zone, I'm just going to lay in a little bit more of my prepared bedding, mainly so that when I drop these pieces of bedding in here, I don't feel like I'm placing all these little worms that are still hanging out on the stuff right onto frozen foods. Going to give them a little bit of a break, hopefully give them the opportunity to get away from that frozen stuff if they're not in the mood to be in contact with it. And let's not forget, we've also got this nice large portion of coffee to include. See, some of this stuff was dry, some of this was a little bit more damp. So that to me looks like a pretty good feeding. And to cap it all off, these crushed eggshell bits are going to go in as the grit to accompany their feeding. So let's backfill. A lot of times when I backfill, I like to go to the outskirts of the bin to get material and bring it inboard, giving us a chance to aerate that stuff out there too, and also get a peek at how things out there look. Luckily, the moisture content throughout this system feels really good. And then, you know, the bedding material, my prepared bedding, is prepared with moisture. And then you saw all those different bits of juicy plum and other veggie and fruit matter. That stuff, once it starts to thaw, I believe is also going to kick out even more moisture. So I think from a moisture perspective, this system is in really good shape. And we'll even be covering up at the end with plastic so that very little, if any, of the moisture that makes up this system will be lost to evaporation. Although, as the humidity gets greater and greater, and as the warm weather causes my furnace to run less and less to the point where it pretty much doesn't even kick on anymore, the humidity level in the house and down here in the wormery as well gets higher and higher. So I do need to remain vigilant. Many of my systems have been losing their plastic covers in favor of paper-based covers. And, you know, I just spotted a little flying insect over here. So before we cap off this system and call it a day, I'm going to put in a little bit of mosquito dunks too. For good measure, not so much because I got the impression that insects in here are a big problem, but I think more as a preventative measure. So that's it for our check-in with the now 34-day-old red wiggler worms, originally from the outdoor worm bag. Just recently bought in to become part of the population, indoor worms, domesticated if you will. And pretty soon the notion of them being outdoor worms will become a thing of the past. So I've got a couple things to take care of, getting cleaned up, put away, but I'm not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.